Okay, today we're going to finish up in the book of Galatians. We're in chapter 6, and I like to think about Galatians just like our foundation series. In the first couple of chapters, we talked about how we start a relationship with God by trusting Jesus, right? That's what Paul is saying. And then in chapter 5, Paul explains how to live once you become a Christian, and we live according to the fruit of the Spirit. We live to honor God, and that was truth 2 of our foundation series. And then in this last chapter, Paul is going to talk now about what should happen finally is that we should look outward and we should try to help other people to pursue God. We call that truth 3 of foundations, and I'll put a link to that right here if you haven't ever covered that topic before. But here's what Paul says in verse 1. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path," right? You should help other people honor God. If you see a Christian who's failing to honor God in his or her life, help him out, mentor him, walk with them, shepherd him so that they can get back on the right path. And he says, and be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. In verse 2, he says, share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. Now, I think what he's talking about there is, again, Matthew 22, that we should love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. I think he's talking about that law of Christ, right? That when we share each other's burdens, we're loving our neighbor, and in this way, we're really obeying the law of Christ. You notice it's not about all these other laws and rules and regulations like circumcision. All of those are institutional laws that really aren't going to make you right with God. It's by faith that we're made right with God. And once we've done that, the Holy Spirit comes into our lives, and now we can live out this new kind of life that is in accordance with the law of Christ, loving God, loving your neighbor as yourself. So as we scroll down a little bit further, he says, those who live only to satisfy their own sinful nature will harvest decay and death from that sinful nature, but those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit. So, he says, let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. And I think that's a great message to many of us who are reading this today, who are Christians, who have maybe tried to help other people to pursue God. We've tried to, sort of share another Christian's burdens, or we've tried to share our faith with other people. Sometimes it can be discouraging. Sometimes you can give up and sort of stop helping someone else, and you can sort of become inwardly focused. And what Paul is saying here is don't do that. Don't give up. Keep moving forward. Keep trying to help other people pursue God, even as you yourself are pursuing God. So at the very end here, he just gives some final advice. And here's kind of the summary of this whole letter. He says this: it doesn't matter whether we have been circumcised or not. What counts is whether we have been transformed into a new creation. Remember, how does that transformation happen? Because the Holy Spirit is in us, creating that transformation, right? And so Paul says this: may God's peace and mercy be upon all who live by this principle. They are the new people of God, not the Jewish people by birth. It's not about whether you're Jew or Gentile. He says the new people of God are the ones who live by this principle, are the ones who are changed by what Jesus did. They're the new people of God. Jew, Gentile, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be circumcised to become a child of God. You become a child of God through faith in Jesus Christ. And this is what Paul's message is in this first letter that he's written to his churches. Now, later on, we're going to read more letters from Paul as we continue our Bible reading plan. But at least for now, you're ready to finish up Galatians, and we'll see you tomorrow for the next book.